Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. It's always so exciting when you're hosting an evening PD and people are actually in the waiting room waiting to join. So that always puts a smile on my face and I'm always super happy. So thank you for joining us this evening or afternoon, depending on where you're located. So excited to have you with us today. We're going to give just another minute or two. We do have a large crowd registered, but we always know some people just like the recording at the end. They're going to miss out on all the fun and engagement. So that's their loss. But I am so excited that you are here with us today. And we're just going to keep admitting all of these people in. Thank you, Patricia. So I'm Natasha Scott. I'll do a more formal introduction in a minute, but it's always nice to get to know him. It's like going to college and making sure you're in the right place. I'm Natasha Scott. I'm the Director of Educator Engagement for civics, and we are going to be diving in momentarily with an introduction to the EAD roadmap and what it means to be an EAD teacher. So we have a great session for us today. I will give you this caveat. I am not going to be talking at you for the whole 90 minutes. We know no one wants to hear someone talk at them for such a long time. So there will be opportunities to engage, to share your thoughts and ideas. And actually right now in the chat, I will drop in our landing page today. So one of the things, and my amazing colleague, Patricia, is going to be dropping in things left and right. She's amazing. Wonderful. So if you can go ahead and open up that Google site there, that Google site is going to be where all of our engagement is happening this evening. We know one of the challenging things with Zoom is, when you pose a question and then all of a sudden everyone's answering and it scrolls and scrolls and scrolls for days and you can't even read it. And then you're trying to catch up. So one of the structures that we like to use are Padlets. Padlets are great. You can think of it like a sticky note on a whiteboard. So that's where all of our engagement will be happening today. So if you can go ahead and open that up, we'll get started in just a moment. So again, it is wonderful to see everyone today. And if you are unmuted, feel free to mute yourself and we will dive right in. And I'm going to go ahead and share. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just so that we can go ahead and officially get started, because we do know your time is precious and we want to make sure that you are in and are able to get out right on time. So thank you, everyone. And I'm sure people will continue to pop in as we go along. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. This is always the mystery. Can you select the right screen? Let's see. Okay, hold on 1 second. And of course, the screen I want is not there. We're going to try this one more time. And thank you for your patience. There you go. Sometimes you just need to stretch it a little bit more for it to fit. And I always give this caveat. I am a former elementary teacher by trade. So I lean into my classroom management skills. Can't help it. If you should be seeing the slide deck right now. If you can just give me a thumbs up so that I know. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. And so we are going to jump right in today. I'm going to ask Patricia to throw that link into the chat one more time. So our discussion today, we're going to use our landing page, which is a wonderful Google site, very simple. But what it's going to do is give us the opportunity to share our thoughts and ideas. Just make sure that we're continuing to be able to process and engage throughout the session. And so those of you who just jumped on, I'm Natasha Scott, Director of Educator Engagement for civics. Many of my colleagues are on here today, which I'm very excited to see. My amazing colleague, Patricia, will be helping me out with the chat and throwing thoughts and ideas. And we do have two amazing guests that I will introduce a little bit later on. Kay Kawashima Ginsburg and Valencia Abbott, who will be joining us a little bit later. I'll give them the formal introduction with the bio and everything. So right now, I'm going to just toggle over to our site. So if you are looking at the site now, you'll see that as I scroll down, the slide deck for today's session is embedded right there. We know sometimes it's nice to be able to go back. If there's a slide that you wanted to glance at again, you'll find that right there. Additionally, if you keep scrolling down, all of our different stop points are numbered. So our first stop point for today is just introductions. And I see so many people starting to throw their locations on the map, which is wonderful. Go ahead and tell us where you are, show us on the map. So one of the great things about Padlet, all you have to do is click on the plus sign in the corner. I am located just out of Boston. So I'm going to type in here, Boston, Massachusetts, and you can introduce yourself here if you want. Hi. Of course, every time a pop-up comes up, it doesn't want to let me type. There we go. And press publish, and that'll add you to the map. So as you know, for those of you who signed up today, this is actually a series of workshops. So today's just the first one, and hopefully you'll join us for more into the future. And it's always just exciting to see who's kind of continuing to join our conversation and where everyone is located throughout the country. So you'll see that there. And then if you scroll down, a more traditional Padlet is right underneath. Tell us your name, tell us who you are, just give us one reason why you're here today. Okay, let's get our conversation going and just starting to share who's in the room and what's bringing you to today's conversation about EAD. And so I see some people have been introduced from colleagues, making connections to their work. Wonderful. And I always give the disclaimer, the second screen is on the left. So when I'm looking over here, I'm actually looking at your comments. Okay, wonderful. And one of the great things about using this space to share, you can keep adding your thoughts and ideas as we continue with our discussion today. So if you're still pondering and you want to add some more details, feel free to do so. Not a problem at all. And Mary Ellen Daniels, wonderful colleague out in Illinois, as she's mentioning in the chat, they're giving PD credit for today's webinars. And if you didn't apply through her, you can go ahead and reach out to her. And Mary Ellen is amazing. Thanks, Michael. Okay, I love seeing that we're coming from all different places across the country, really bringing in different perspectives to the conversation and bringing in different experiences into the classroom too. Okay, I'm seeing some 8th grade civics teachers. I'm seeing some high school teachers. I'm seeing some gifted and talented teachers. I'm seeing some adult educators. So one of the great things that I love about EAD is really, and the EAD roadmap. So Educating for American Democracy, you'll hear me refer to it throughout the session as EAD. So the EAD roadmap, one of the elements that I love is it provides that K-12 scope and sequence. And those who are coming in from an adult education and maybe even an early childhood education, you can really see where you can stretch and pull that content. So which is fabulous for our discussion today. So keep adding in your details there, which is wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and keep us moving along. And just a quick reminder, we usually get this question, so I just want to frame it up front. If you need documentation for participation in today's session, at the end of the session today, there'll be an exit ticket. You'll fill that out and to respond to those questions. And then there'll also be an option to insert your contact information. So that'll all be there as well. So please make sure that if you are looking for credit, go ahead. And the other element that we are tracking is through our Padlets. So go ahead and respond to the Padlets. We'll use the Padlets and we'll use the exit ticket at the end, and then we'll send you out a confirmation. Okay. So excited to have you here today. We're going to now jump in. We've kind of gone over our logistics and we're ready to dive in. And throughout the session, if you have questions, please feel free to jot them into the chat. I will be glancing up every now and then. I kind of have it at an angle over here, so I'll be glancing up every now and then to grab any of those questions and answer them the best that I can, or tag some of my colleagues in to answer as well. So if anything pops up, feel free to ask it. There's no such thing as a bad question. So as we think about, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to our slide deck today, and you'll see me toggle back and forth between these two screens. So if for some reason I'm talking and you're not seeing what I'm talking about, go ahead and give me the frantic wave, because I have you all on gallery view, and I will be happy to make sure that I correct that. There's educator here at heart, a realist as well. Things happen. So we're just going to keep going and make it the best session that we can. So when we talk about educating for American democracy, one of the wonderful things about the roadmap, about the report, about all of the different components, is it was built originally by a cross-ideological team of expert historians, political scientists, educators, as well as different contributors from across the field. Now, this, sorry, let me get back over here. There we go. So this project was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Department of Education, and it was led by Circle, iCivics, the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics, the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University, and the Jonathan Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University. And so we are very lucky today to have one of our original primary investigators, our principal investigators, Kay Kawashima-Gisberg, joining us later on. So I'm going to tag her in just a little bit. We're going to go over our EAD 101 first. So when we think about what is EAD, EAD is providing guidance for civics and history education and really striving for that excellence, thinking about how are we teaching civics and history in terms of building students' knowledge and capacity to sustain America's constitutional democracy. Now, in order to help us get there, we have 3 core documents that I'll reference throughout today. We'll start diving into these. We first have our EAD report. The report is really what contains the theory, the rationale, and the approach to the roadmap and the thinking behind it. Then we also have our EAD roadmap itself, which we'll dive in even more depth today. The report you can download and that you can read it on your own later. The roadmap we'll dive into today. And what that has is that has the 7 themes that really spread across 4 grade levels and just dives deeper. And we'll look at that structure and look at those questions. And then finally, we have our pedagogic companion. And the pedagogic companion goes into the 6 core pedagogical principles and really frames what it means to be an EAD teacher. So if we think of the EAD roadmap as the content and the pedagogic companion as the approach and strategy. So all of these documents can be downloaded at our website, www.educatingforamericandemocracy.org. You can find everything there. We'll dive into some of the other aspects of the website a little bit later, but just wanted to make sure that you knew where to find that. And the download button is in the top right-hand corner. So when we think about what the roadmap is, really seeing it as an inquiry framework and designs, and these within that inquiry framework, there's these design principles that really guide states and districts to really design what that and to design and develop what excellent history and civics instruction learning looks like. Okay? Now, the important element to understand is that this is not a national curriculum, nor is it a mandate. It's not even a series of facts, but rather questions that really promote depth over breadth. And when we dive into some of the questions, you'll see how they scaffold across the grade levels and gradually become more complex. The roadmap also really cultivates that concept of what reflective patriotism is. Okay, how do we balance that understanding and the telling of America's plural and yet shared story? Thinking about how we balance the tension we see between the honest accounting of both the good and the bad within our history. Okay, and we'll see those threads really brought through both through the design challenges that we'll dive into, as well as those 7 themes. And so now, with much weight, we're going to dive into the EAD roadmap itself. So when we think about the EAD roadmap, really at its core is inquiry. Okay? And with it, we start with those design challenges, which really frame these dilemmas in history and civics content. And really what we see there is we see that tension that happens back and forth. And rather, what those design challenges actually say is rather than shying away from that tension, but actually leaning into it and thinking about how do we facilitate conversations and engage students in those conversations with that tension. Then we have the 7 content themes, and these have those big ideas in history and civics, and those are guided by thematic questions and key concepts. Then we go down a step further, and then we get into our driving questions. These driving questions are, again, both from the history and civics lens, drive long-term planning in the classroom. And then finally, we have those sample guiding questions. Those sample guiding questions, that's really what frames out history and civic concepts for much shorter inquiries. So you can see where we get these big concepts and ideas and then gradually get more focused throughout the roadmap as you go through each theme. Now, the design challenges are really the core that hold up our roadmap. So with these design challenges, there are 5 design challenges. Design challenge number 1, motivating agency and sustaining the republic. What this design challenge is really having us think about is how can we help students understand the full context of their role as civic participants without creating paralysis and a sense of insignificance? How do we really engage our students in that understanding? Design challenge 2, America's plural yet shared story, really getting us to think about how can we integrate the perspectives of Americans from across different backgrounds in narrating our history. E pluribus versus unum. We then have design challenge number 3. How can we acknowledge design challenge number 3, which is simultaneously celebrating and critiquing compromise? And with design challenge number 3, we're thinking about how can we acknowledge that from its inception, Americans have simultaneously disagreed about the ideal shape of self-government while also ultimately agreeing to preserve shared institutions. We then have design challenge number 4, which is civic honesty and reflective patriotism, really giving us this opportunity to grapple with this concept of how do we narrate our country's history in a way that is honest about the past without falling into cynicism and appreciative about its foundings without tipping into adulation, okay, and really embracing that tension. And finally, design challenge number 5, how can we support instruction in helping students move between concrete and narrative and chronological learning and thematic, abstract, or conceptual learning? Thinking about how do we balance that, the tension that we feel with history and civics in terms of balancing the concrete and the abstract. Now, it's very interesting as we talk about these design challenges, we get to this point where we all kind of have our favorites. I know some of you have been with us for a little bit and have been to several workshops. If you've been to other EAD workshops and you've started exploring the roadmap, you might have a favorite. I'm not going to lie, my favorite is definitely design challenge number 2. What design challenge number 2, when we think about that challenge that I love to think about is how do we integrate all of those stories? So when we think about our students in the classroom, we think about how do we bring in those perspectives and how do we have our students feel like they see themselves? Okay? So that's definitely my favorite design challenge. Hearing some of those questions, seeing some of those concepts and ideas, I would love, and let's see if I can find it. I would love for you to take a moment and think about which design challenge feels like it resonates with you the most? Right now, just kind of that gut feeling. Which one do you feel like you want to lean in and explore in a little bit more depth? Okay. Excellent. It's always interesting. Everyone's like, oh, it's so hard to pick just one. And don't worry, you don't have to pick just one. It's just fun to think about kind of where do you want to start? So give us another 30 seconds. If you haven't decided and identified your design challenge that you're just really resonating with you from our first glance here. Okay, just a couple more people who are just they're just challenging themselves right now. They can't decide. I am going to go ahead and end the poll now. And if you didn't get a chance to share your ideas, throw it into the chat. No worries. I see some people have been throwing it in there too. That's wonderful. I'm going to end the poll just so that you can see kind of how our breakdown is right now. So you can see that we have a lot of us who are thinking about design challenge number 4, design challenge number 3, number 2, and then number 1 and number 5. With design challenge number 5, I will say we usually think of that more from the instructional lens in terms of planning and facilitation and unit design. So we really think of it through that lens. As we have these design challenges, one of the things that you're really going to appreciate throughout the series, so if you decide to come back and join us again, what you'll really appreciate throughout the series is each of these design challenges actually connects to the themes. So I'm going to stop sharing these now so that we can get back to our slide deck. And just to give you an example of a full example of what the full language of a design challenge reads. So design challenge 2, I know I picked my favorite, it's okay. America's plural yet shared story. So each of the design challenges, some of them have several questions that just really grapple at that tension and depth that we see. How can we integrate the perspectives of Americans from all different backgrounds? That was the previous question that I mentioned. But then there's also this, how can we do so consistently across all historical periods and conceptual content? And finally, how can we how can this more plural and more complete story of our history and foundation also be a common story, the shared inheritance of all Americans? So you see how these design challenges, you can feel the tension there, and you can think that and really grapple with how are you really going to bring these into the classroom? Okay. And you can start to see points of connections with your own content that you may teach and that you may be engaging with. So as I mentioned before, we have those design challenges within the roadmap. We also have those 7 themes. Now, and you're going to have to listen closely. I'm going to ask you the same question at the end. Which theme are you excited to explore? So when we have these 7 themes, we're really thinking of these themes really help us think about how can we rethink and reprioritize what goes into our curriculum and how we're developing and planning for the year and how we're engaging our students. As we have these 7 themes, each of these 7 themes are divided into 4 grade bands, which I'll show you in just a moment. And those grade bands gradually dives deeper and becomes more complex as they continue through across K-12. So when we think about these 7 themes, we really start with theme number 1, exploring what it means to participate in our American constitutional democracy through the theme of civic participation. Let me go back, sorry about that. And then theme 2 and 3, then go ahead and continue exploring how American constitutional democracy came to be, both through the places, as we see in theme 2, our changing landscape, and the people of which it consists, as we see in theme 3, we the people. We then continue on with theme 4, a new government and constitution, really exploring how shared political institutions emerge, have been transformed and operate now. Then thinking about in theme 5, institutional and social transformation, thinking about the diverse array of benefits and harms that have been brought by those institutions. And then theme 6, thinking about a people in the world, the place of the US in the world more broadly. And then theme number 7, contemporary debates and possibilities, really exploring the ongoing debates that characterize contemporary American civic life, as well as the possibilities available to us for those more concrete realization of our ideals. So we see the gradual progression across these themes. And so here's a challenge question now. Which theme do you really want to go back after this session today and dive into deeper? So I'm going to put up your next poll. So take a second. And Patricia is already 10 steps ahead of me. She put a link to the themes into the chat, so you will have access to that as well. And on our website, we actually have an interactive roadmap. So where you can download the roadmap itself in a PDF form, you also have access to the interactive roadmap where you can toggle in between and really get an opportunity to explore a little bit quicker. But I won't lie, I still have my hard copy on my desk. It's been here for quite a bit now that I go back to and refer to constantly. So I'll give you another minute or two thinking about what theme you might want to dive into a little bit closer. And this one's also This one's also very tough to dive to just pick one, because all of these themes, you begin, as you plan your units, you begin to see the connection across the themes. And so there may be a time where you actually are pulling in concepts and understandings from different themes, and that's perfectly fine, because it's those questions and those inquiries that you're designing that really allows for that deeper learning. I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. Let's see, we're actually pretty even across the board there. Our changing landscapes needs a little more love, but that's okay. We'll come back to the land, space, and understanding place. We'll come back to that. So great to just get an idea. And really, this is just kind of prompting you to think about where you can start thinking about how you bring this into your classroom or into your setting. Though, considering that all of us are not necessarily in the classroom here today, some of us are district leaders, some of us are department leads, some of us are in higher ed. So thinking about how you can actually use this to inform your content in your curriculum. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll now and dive into a specific theme. So theme 3, we the people. As we look at theme 3, this is what you'll see within the roadmap, really how it gives a description of the theme, what it's going to dive into. You see those thematic questions, both from a history perspective, as well as a civics perspective. So you can see there, I'm going to stretch it so I can actually read it. There we go. Who are we, the people of the United States, and how has the nation's population changed over time? And then we also see for our civics theme, why does constitutional democracy depend on the idea of the people? So you'll have these thematic questions for each of those themes. And then you also have key concepts. Now, key concepts are broken up into a K-5 and 6-12 key concepts. But what you see is you see these concepts that start developing in K-5 and then gradually progress into 6-12. Now, these are actually one of the elements that I love about this roadmap. I've spent a lot of time with this roadmap, obviously, that I really enjoy and appreciate about this roadmap. As a former elementary teacher, you see the challenges of being able to think about where you want to start so that you understand where your kids are going to into the future and where the foundation that you're setting in elementary school can build up into a secondary level. And in secondary, thinking about what experiences and what conversations can our younger students be having in order to deepen this. So you can also see here, let's see if, there we go. Oops. Okay. So just again, we can see how exploring the history of inclusion and exclusion of the people and access to citizenship then transforms into analyzing the impact of enslavement, indigenous removal, immigration, and other hard histories on definitions and pathways to citizenship. So you see that direct relationship between those K-5 key concepts and those 6-12 key concepts. Now, the questions that we have here. So we've started off with our thematic questions, then we got into our key concepts, really just giving us the big conceptual ideas for that theme. And then we get into these driving questions. Now, these driving questions really frame out the learning of what students, of learning in terms of the inquiry that students can engage in. Now, as driving questions, a lot of these questions could be across a unit, across several units, but you can see where the scaffolding happens here. In K2, where they think about what kind of stories tell us who we are and where we are from and how that progresses into how can the US population, how's it changed over time? What have been the push and pull factors? So we see where it becomes a little more complicated. And then in 6-8, you see again here, in what ways and to what extent have the diverse people of the US become one nation and face challenges doing that? And finally, in 9-12, seeing how does the United States kind of and degree of pluralism compare with pluralism elsewhere in the world? So you start off with this foundational understanding in terms of who we are and where we're from and how that gradually progresses across K-12. Now you'll see the same structure with the driving questions for each of the themes, which is wonderful because you can see the gradual progression, the deepening of knowledge as students engage in these topics. It also gives you place to challenge your students as you need and thinking about where you can pull in those questions to frame out these inquiries. And with that concept, the conceptual understanding of inquiries, which is the key part of this framework. Notice it's not your standards document that is just a checklist of saying like, okay, you covered this date and this date and this date, but rather it is questions. And so now what I would love for you to do is go back to that Padlet and really think about how can the design challenges and themes deepen the implementation of your current content and or standards. So remember, not all of us are in the classroom, but thinking about how you can use those design challenges and themes. So you're going to go ahead and scroll down to number 2 and just drop in some thoughts and ideas there. And this is the joy about Padlet. It gives people some time to kind of stop, think, do some processing, and really think about how we can start to make those connections with our own work. Okay, how we begin to see those the design challenges and themes, begin to make connections with the content that you're already teaching in the classroom. Okay, and how do we use them to actually deepen it? And I think that's one of the elements that I love about the roadmap is it allows you to make those connections in terms of what you currently teach and how do you continue to improve it. There we go. We can start to see some of those ideas pop up. And this is the joy of live presentations and live sessions, just giving yourself some time to stop, think, and having some of that wait time. as a presenter, some of that wait time. So this is where it's like, oh, we're not just going to keep plowing ahead, but actually stop, giving people time to stop and think about that. And Patricia did put the link. So if you're just joining us, welcome. So glad you could be here today. You'll actually see that link in that Patricia has put as our landing site for today. It has everything that you need for our conversation. So you'll see it right there. You can go ahead and jot in your thoughts and ideas, how you begin to see those connections between the design challenges and the 7 themes and your current content or standards that you're currently addressing. Okay. See, we just have to give people some wait time and ideas come flowing. And so as a participant, please feel free to read through what your colleagues are saying, or your colleagues from across the country. Think about how you can pull these in. So I'm seeing some people give recommendations about pulling it into questions into their units, which is great. Thinking about vertical alignment between grade bands, wonderful if you're thinking across the district. Honestly, even within one school, I know the difference that from 3rd to 4th to 5th, from a high school freshman classroom to the sophomore year course. Think about how do you build those points of alignment vertically as well, so that students are having these opportunities to have these really rich inquiries to just continue to deepen. So I'll give you just another moment before we transition. Okay, so while you're finishing your ideas there, I am going to give a wonderful introduction to our amazing guests next. So the 6 core pedagogical principles, we're going to dive into them. You've heard plenty from me, kind of setting your foundation with the design challenges, with the themes. And now I'm going to actually turn it over to my good colleague and friend, wonderful Kei Kawashima Ginsburg. She is the new House Director. I'm going to read her formal bio. We always know we love these when we give presentations. So she is the new House Director of the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, CIRCLE, at the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University, which studies youth civic and political learning and engagement. So there, Kay oversees CIRCLE's expansive portfolio of research initiative, tools and reports for practitioner and academic audiences to advance evidence-based policy and practice in the civic sector. Kay received her PhD from Loyola University in Chicago, where she learned to apply child and adolescent development principles and assessment to clinical settings and study the impact of positive youth development interventions with a degree in clinical psychology. She currently serves as a member of the Educating for American Democracy Implementation Consortium, as well as the implementation working group of the Our Common Purpose Report, a project of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And so with that, I am going to welcome amazing colleague, amazing peer, Kay, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Natasha, and hi, everybody. It's so good to be here, and it's really nice to revisit the companion with Natasha, who is really a co-author of this piece of the roadmap. I'm going to start my comments with kind of the origin story of how the pedagogy guidance and companion came to be. You can see, and we talk about the objectives of the Educating for American Democracy project all the time because we're serious about it. So that's what was given in the beginning of our work together when the task forces were forming, was to really achieve these objectives that we set for ourselves. 60 million students, 1 million teachers. I think pretty much sure I'm missing a digit there. Apologies. We want 1 million teachers and 100,000 schools. So it's really ambitious goals. And so we set ourselves to say, we have 2 roles here. One is to really be in touch with practice, because the kind of the content experts that were forming the task forces to understand what to ask in history and what to ask in civics, and working really hard to combine those and integrate them, were largely academic people. And we knew if we wanted to get to these impact, we needed to be in conversation, and constantly so, with the practitioners who are on the ground. And then second, we needed to make sure we're bringing the best of the best from the learning science, from civic education, from history education, and other disciplines, to try to make sure we're incorporating best practices in what we know as something that could promote the implementation of the roadmap. So if you can go to the next slide. After our mission was set, the sequence of activity was pretty logistical, but pretty long, long and complicated. So from forming the task force, we went to do quite a bit of literature review. We produced a couple of different memos at different phases. And then we would go back to the steering committee, which were a mix of practitioners, included people like Valencia and Mary Ellen Daniels and others who may be here today, and then talked through some of the findings. And then we would go back to reiterate what we found, and then we would extract some of that. Then we spent, and as in that, I mean that by Natasha, and our wonderful intern, then Alex Foley, spent whole summer in 2020, was it, Natasha? Listening to educators across the country. And what we did there was very, very demonstrative of what EAD is as an initiative. We drafted, after a retreat in Louisiana, first ever draft of the roadmap. And that's a bunch of inquiry questions. We knew the themes then, but when we brought that to educators that summer, it was really not done at all. We brought what was the first draft to them and said, what would it be like to actually try to implement these questions? If we were to use these inquiries in your classroom, what would you need? What would be things that would excite you? What kind of support do you need? And we gathered all those inputs, and that was really a core part of how we formed that guidance. And then from there, we went back and forth again. And then what we ended up doing was we would pull things like the themes, we would pull the principles, and we would pull the design challenges and all the best of the findings from the literature review and these inputs from the workshops. And then we had this 1,000 or so stickies that we organized into the themes. And that is how we make the Pedagogy Companion document, believe it or not. So if you can go to the next slide here, I'm going to just quote one thing that really I always held really close to heart after I heard that or read that, or I think I heard this one live. That was a teacher who said the successful change happens when it's embraced from both top down and bottom up, all parties being engaged in the same mission. And that was really inspirational to me. And that kind of principle of really thinking about always being in touch with people that are working on the front line of education, while being true to my own origin as a researcher and a scholar, and then combining that and extracting that into hopefully user-friendly companion, pedagogy companion, was sort of the work that we did, Natasha and I. And we continue to do that. With further ado, we can look at the principles fairly quickly so that you can kind of go ahead and read that. But as a way to think about the way that we design these 6 principles, I think of this as a clock. I think of the content themes as more like pizza. You can start anywhere and you can jump to another slice. This one, we would want you to start from 1, the excellence for all. And the reason we started there is because we thought that the goals that we set for ourselves is so ambitious that we need to actually start with a mindset of believing in ourselves as educators and believing in all the students, regardless of where they come from, what kind of background they have, which community they live in. And really believing in that inspiring potential that everybody can achieve civic excellence and be fully ready for the constitutional democratic life that they can participate. From there, we go on to really think about the conditions and the preparation that the teachers and students need, which is the growth mindset. And this really came from the inputs from educators across the country. They were really inspired by the first edition of the roadmap, but they all said, it's going to be hard. What kind of support are you going to provide? We're going to need examples. We're going to need to be supported. And I, at the same time, was really learning through my lifetime teacher, Mary Ellen Benils, from our partnership in Illinois, that the teachers really do need social emotional support when they're really trying to make significant changes to how they teach civics and history. Because of that, we thought that there needs to be deep professional learning experiences, practice communities, of course, the content heavy, but also really comes with that cohort and support and common, sort of the solidarity with other teachers. We also then heard from teachers that, what about these stakeholders we have? It can be principals, it can be parents, it could be school committee in some cases, and of course, students. And we also knew that the teachers thought those inquiries are inspirational and important, but hard to implement, especially when they don't have strong, trusting relationship. So we placed number 3 there as kind of a readiness of the environment, the climate that can really support sometimes challenging and courageous conversations and inquiries about American history and our civic life today. We're about to have anniversary of January 6th, tomorrow, for example. And we believe that, and still believe that, we need a real classroom relationship that is intergenerational, that's authentic, and it's kind of the civic friendship we're looking for in the classroom, so that when difficult issues arise or when students need to make decisions together, the relationship and trust can hold that together. Then, and only then, we thought that the teachers really can safely start to do these inquiries. It's not that they shouldn't do that before it's all established, but we think that there's potentially a risk of not serving all students when we just go ahead and ask these potentially challenging questions. So ideally, 1, 2, 3 are done before you move into the inquiry. And when we talk about the inquiry as a primary mode of learning, we're thinking of inquiry as a lifestyle, as opposed to some activities that you do sometimes. So it goes for actual instructional activities that's really inquiry-based, but also the ethos of inquisition and curiosity about new things, other people who are different from themselves, rest of the world, and so on. So the students develop a habit of inquiry and inquiring about things that they don't know yet, and actually enjoy that process. And of course, when we think about inquiry-based learning, we have to also think about, so what part of that, right? We also heard from educators throughout the listening tour that, what about the action? How can students actually take actions based on what they learn? The content learning would be great through the inquiries, but what if they can apply that? And we agreed. So we framed this as practice of constitutional democracy. It's not just instructional practice and activities, but also as a school, as a community, as a classroom, and its peer groups, how can we make sure that the students are able to experience what it's like to live in a constitutional democracy? And there are a variety of practices that have been established to be able to do that. We then wrap the whole thing, to go back once more, because it's a clock, to number 1, with assessment, reflection, and improvement. And that's really coming again from the principle number 1 and number 2, where we are really thinking of teachers as evolving individuals who are also learners, and so are students, who should be understanding what their strengths and some areas of improvements are as they learn about civic life, and also understand what they really are passionate about, whether it's an issue or the way they engage. And they can continue to become citizens in this democracy. So that's the wheel. The way that Natasha and I really try to think about using the pedagogy companion is to really try to be as brief as possible, but with enough concrete guidance for folks to be able to use some of the information. So if you can go to the next slide, Natasha or Patricia. This is what the pages look like in the pedagogical companion. We start with the definition of each principle. We talk about why we think that's really important. It's usually based on the evidence from research. And if the teachers said that a lot, that was also usually supported by research evidence. We'll then talk about how that kind of principle may be manifested in the classroom. And then we follow that up with kind of the example of the things that teachers, education leaders, and students could be doing in order to live by that principle, so that there's some concrete ideas for you to try. And then of course, we consider this whole thing, I think the whole initiative is a living organism, at least I do. So there would be more and more ideas as we come out with these webinars and more communities of practice evolve. So I'm really excited to see you all producing more of these moves. All right. So here is example of the moves. Thank you for advancing that. So just look at a couple of things. So this is inquiry as a primary mode of learning principle. So you see things like designing lessons that uncover the complexity of the event, dynamic social groups, or leading individual. So those are the kind of this idea that coming from design challenges, really. We need to be revealing different kind of narratives, different perspectives all the time. And again, remain curious about those different perspectives. For students, they can really look at sort of things like how the sources differ in terms of the kinds of information they're providing, which perspective are they coming from, and without, so to say, counseling these different perspectives, students can fully engage and still come out with what they really think about certain issues or certain events that happened historically. But our belief is that students deserve all the perspectives that are out there. They don't necessarily need to believe in any of those things, but they deserve to be exposed to multiple perspectives. So because of that, you'll see a variety of kind of angles to the inquiry for the same theme if you go back to the roadmap. And these moves reflect some of these principles as well. I think I'm going to wrap up here so we can move on to the next Padlet activity. I think, Natasha?
Yes, thank you, Kay. I think Kay always does an amazing job of framing the thinking, both in terms of the development of the pedagogy companion and just how we progress as educators through those different core principles, starting with core principle number 1 and just really driving through those different concepts and understandings. And thinking, one of the other elements that I always think about when I think about those core principles is thinking about how core principles 1 through 3 really set the foundation of the learning environment and the dispositions that have to be established in order to get into those rigorous inquiries. Lots of times school leaders want us to jump into this rigorous inquiry, but the foundation of the learning environment and the dispositions haven't been established yet. So thinking about how 1, 2, and 3 really establishes those learning dispositions and that learning environment. And then we think of 4, 5, and 6 really engaging in that rich practice and instructional instruction. So what I would love for you to do now is take a moment. We're going to jump back to our session over here. And we are going to, I'm going to clear those annotations. There we go. And so what we're going to do over here is I want you to go ahead down to the next Padlet. And now my annotations are going bananas. There we go. We'll scroll down and I'll clear those out while you guys are stopping and thinking, making those connections to pedagogy, thinking about how can inquiry and those 6 core pedagogical principles shift classroom instruction. So take a minute, think about that, and I'm going to clear those for us here.
Going on house first name.
There we go. This is when we just play elementary teacher and just erase. There we go. Wonderful. Okay, so we can see those connections that everyone's starting to make, helping students organize their thinking and their learning, thinking about how we're really engaging with that concept of depth over breadth. Okay, and encouraging that deep and complex analysis there, thinking about how more inquiry really has that student-centered learning. Okay. And giving students the ownership of their learning there. I must say, I hadn't thought of that yet. Thinking about how this connects with national board certification. Great thinking connection there. Okay, thinking about real world application relevance, that core principle number 5, wonderful. Core principle number 4. Excellent. And I really appreciate you taking the time to really stop and make those connections so that when you leave this evening, you have some different ways that you can just start diving in, and graphics are always welcomed. So if you still haven't finished sharing your thoughts and ideas there, go ahead and just keep copying, keep writing them down. And I'm going to go back to our slide deck and actually welcome our next speaker in just a moment. So Valencia will be joining us in just a moment, and really think about the EAD roadmap in the classroom. As I mentioned before, we do have our amazing website, the www.educatingforamericandemocracy.org. On that website, you can download the report and the roadmap. You'll see that there in the top right-hand corner. You also have the interactive roadmap. So that's a great place to toggle in between the different themes, see how the design challenges relate to the themes. It's very exciting. And then you get stuck in that research of like, oh, if I click here, and just see the connections across the different themes. And then additionally, we have educator resources. Now, these educator resources we're extremely proud of. Right now, the collection has about 400 educator resources, and they are continuing to grow. So we keep adding more and more resources from a variety of organizations. And these resources can be sorted and filtered by grade level, by theme, by design challenge, really allowing you to focus your exploration in any direction that you'd like and how it helps you plan in your instruction. Now, these resources, I will say, go through a very collaborative and rigorous review process with the EAD Educator Task Force that Valencia is going to talk about, and just her experience with that and her perspectives on EAD. And it goes through that rigorous process before joining the library. That's why it grows. You'll see all of a sudden there'll be a new upload of resources, because it takes time to get them vetted. And each of these individual submissions is first independently reviewed by 2 educators using a rubric developed by the task force, which really focuses on categories of alignment to the EAD themes and the driving questions, but also the concepts of inquiry, rigor, equity from a diversity and inclusion lens, as well as an accessibility lens, and also viewpoint pluralism. So you'll see all of these different perspectives, and sometimes you'll see the same topic covered by many different organizations, bringing different perspectives to that same moment in history or to that same conversation, which is amazing. And so without having to wait any further, I'm actually going to turn it over to and give her nice formal introduction as well to our amazing educator, Valencia Abbott. So Valencia Abbott is currently the Social Studies Department Chair and History Teacher at Rockingham Early College High School in Wentworth, North Carolina. And this school year will mark her 17th year in education. So after completing her master's degree in liberal studies, she received a post-baccalaureate certificate in African American studies at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. In 2016, she received another add-on licensure for academically and intellectually gifted from Duke University. She is also a first-generation college student, receiving a BA degree in political science, pre-law, and a minor in speech from Catawba College. She shares this story with her students at her school because the school's mission is focused on helping students to become first-generation college graduates for their families. She is currently serving on the National Council for History Education Teacher Advisory Group and the National American Civil War Museum Teacher Advisory Committee. And the other parts of her life are filled up with 3 daughters, 1 son-in-law, 4 grandchildren, and 2 grand fur babies. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Valencia and have her really talk with us and share with us how she sees, kind of thinking about how she sees EAD in the classroom. How does it resonate with her? And thinking about, how do you see EAD helping you get to really rich instruction? So Valencia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you, Kay, for everything that you shared. And every time that I am part of this, I learn more, which is really, really great with this. So I've been with iCivics, I actually can't remember when, but it is definitely a relationship that I value. And I was honored to be asked to be aboard this. And as you said, it was It was tough. It was weeks of us going through, actually months, I think, of going through these lesson plans and to do this. So one of the reasons that I always say yes is because I am going to learn more. And then when I learn more, I bring it back to my students. And that truly is the gist of what we do and why we do it. We do it for the students with this. So with EAD, one of the things that I want to point out at the beginning, as with any teacher, I always want to know, how can I use it in the classroom? That's the bottom line, is how is it going to work for me? How is it going to save time? How is it going to make my teaching life better? And I think with all of this, you're going to find that it is going to cover so many different things with that. As you said, I received my add-on licensure from Duke, and that was for the academically gifted, because I was concerned that those students were not getting the attention that they needed. And I wanted to be that teacher to make sure that I was serving all students. So one of the things that I gathered from that was a strategy or a thinking called conceptual lens, where you had a theme. And that was the first time it was introduced to me, to actually to think of a particular theme in constructing your courses or how you're going to teach. And the thing with EAD is that they've already done that work for you. So when we think about the time that it takes to do that, and one of the reasons that is so important is because when we're teaching through that theme, when we're teaching at that level, we're teaching at a higher level. And I'm not talking just about I want to reach my academically gifted kids. I want to reach all kids. I want to teach all of my kids at that level, whether they're identified as AIG or not. In my thinking, they all are exceptional. So that's the way that I'm gonna teach. I'm gonna teach to all of my exceptional students. So when you have that thing presented, or when you're using that thing to teach, I think in the 4 years since I had the add-on licensure, it has taken my teaching to a deeper and richer level. And I always come up with a particular theme. And the thing that I like with EAD is that, like I said, it's done the work for me. It's put that in focus, and then it becomes my decision of how I want to teach my class, which takes away a lot of time. And then not only is it going to give me a theme, but it's also going to end up giving me resources, vetted resources. All right, because just going to Google and putting in something, any teacher knows that is not a best practice. That is not a best practice. And in the time that we have, every teacher is on notice, and in particular, social studies and history teachers are on notice. So you want to make sure that what you have in the classroom is, again, really great scholarship, is correct, and that you're teaching to the best of your ability. So through all of this, there were some resources that I was definitely familiar with. Of course, our civics, facing history. But the one that I was truly surprised about was the National Constitutional Center. And that. Do you have the PowerPoint? Yes. Okay. Yes. All right. So I was really aware of the Constitution Center. I think I had at one time even requested free pocket Constitution, but until I got aboard and working on this project, I did not realize the depth that they had. And the resources that they had. this was one that I kept coming to over and over again. So on the spreadsheet, every time National Center came up, I would just go to them because I wanted to review their lesson plans, because I was just so impressed with everything that they had to offer. And I didn't know that it was there with that. So the one that I had sent to you to look at was the one on slavery, the Civil War and Reconstruction. And one is because I know that for many teachers, the topic of slavery is a difficult subject to teach. And it's a subject that many teachers will just not teach with that. But it's a topic that needs to be taught, and it needs to be taught to all of our students. And it needs to be taught in a way that's not only respectful to the history, but respectful to the students that we have in our classroom. And I also understand that there's teachers that's nervous to do this. And one of the things that I always when I'm mentoring or coaching teachers is tell them, go to the primary sources. Because you're not teaching opinions when you're teaching a primary source. So teach from the primary source. So with this lesson from the National Constitutional Center, because it is connected to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Okay, I mean, those are facts. We can have the students read the words, but to bring it full circle and to go in depth with a lot of different perspectives is what I really like about the lesson. So if you're looking at the design challenge of America's plural, yes, a shared story and civic honesty and reflective patriotism, I mean, you can really take this lesson anywhere that your teaching style or your course or your standard is going to demand of you. And then the ability to have those different resources, because one of the things when you're looking at this resource, it will take you to a Google Doc that you can print out or that you can have your students actually do online. And it has the questions already there. It is just front loaded with so much information that it really is a time saver. But the thing that really blew my mind with this lesson, and I'm hoping that all of you just go and check this lesson out, is the videos that actually are connected to this. And the one in particular that is resonating with me is the one with Clint Smith. And I absolutely, I'm begging you to go and look at that video with that. And I don't want to be put a spoiler out there, but the ending, you have to go all the way to the end. So it's a little less than 50 minutes, but I'm telling you the ending of this video will be worth it. The video, Slavery in America, American with Clint Smith, that video. But to have all of this information and to have it vetted and that you don't have to go back and recheck your information, again, is a time saver with that. And like I said, I was not aware that the National Constitutional Center even had this information, or that they produce lesson plans and resources to this depth. So it made me rethink how I'm already teaching these subjects. You know, I'm teaching the 13th and 14th and 15th, the Reconstruction Amendment. But how can I bring a fresh perspective to it without that additional time that we know that teachers don't have with that? So are there any questions with this one before I go to the next one?
And if you have questions, throw them into the chat. I'm going to keep track of them as Valencia is talking and sharing. So if there's something that pops into your mind, throw it into the chat and I'll throw it over to her.
Yeah, if you have a question of how I teach it or how I would implement this, I've been a teacher for 17 years, so I can definitely tell you, I do not go point by point from any lesson plan, even if it's a really great lesson plan, because it has to fit my style. But a lot of what I found with the National Constitution Center, it was like, I don't have to even reinvent the wheel a lot with this. I liked it. I actually liked some of what they had better than what I was already doing. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, we're going to go this way with this.
And just as a logistics point, I see there's a question coming up. When you click on that link from the link that I put into the chat, it brings you to the Educator Resource Library and to the pop-up that looks like to the one on the screen. If you see in the bottom right-hand corner, it says, see this full resource at the Constitution Center. So one of the elements of the Educator Resource Library is all of these resources link back to the original creator of the resource. So where in the Educator Resource Library, we've identified design challenges, primary themes, secondary themes, learning objectives. And then to get the full resource, you click on that link right there in the bottom right-hand corner. So this is just a screenshot, but the link in the chat, if you go there, bottom right-hand corner, it'll bring you to the amazing resources that Valencia is talking about.
Right. And then the second one that I sent you, and I just want everybody to know, I probably saw hundreds of lesson plans over the summer and early fall. So I am truly not doing it justice when Natasha said that to pick two. I was like, really, really? So she was really mean. I was like, I just can't pick two, but okay, so I had to pick two. So I chose this one because I got a different perspective with this. And when I was thinking of what to share tonight, I was thinking that every lesson plan that I see or that I like doesn't mean that that's going to be a lesson plan that I bring to my students. That you can use a lesson plan to teach yourself. So a lesson plan to teach the teacher. Okay, so when I looked at this one, when I was reviewing this, I had never heard of this resource. I had no idea. Now, I knew what redlining was, all right? I did not know in depth, in particular with this particular time period, redlining in the New Deal America, the time frame that they had put it in, that wasn't as familiar to me. So going through the lesson plan and going through the objectives, it was a learning experience for me. And after finishing reviewing this, I couldn't say, oh, I'm going to teach this in my classroom. Even after going through it again, I still can't say I would teach this in my classroom. What I can say is that I learned a lot just from this lesson plan. And again, we go back to that time element with teachers, is that one thing that we don't have. And I don't have the time to read books and books on redlining to do this, but I did have the time and the availability to go and read this lesson plan and to have enough background information that I could pull concepts from it. And if I felt comfortable enough, yes, then I had that resource that I could teach from there. I would think about using this as a what I call an enrichment project in my class. And those are an assignments where I put out to my students that they can, basically it's extra credit, but it's extra credit with a purpose. It's either to help students to bring up grades, or it's for a topic that I haven't delved long enough for a particular student and they want to learn more. So I would actually maybe make this an enrichment project, even though I wouldn't necessarily teach this lesson. And the fact that, again, if we go to EAD, that they've broken it down to themes and grade levels and all of that, it helps me get to those resources a lot quicker with that. So, any questions with this one?
And I will add that part of the reason this says sneak peek is that it isn't posted on the EAD website just yet. It is been approved by all the parties that need to approve it, and it's just waiting in the queue to be posted. So you have a little behind the scenes sneak peek here for this resource.
Yes.
Any questions, anything that you're wondering that you'd love to ask Valencia?
Yes, that these are great resources with this. Yeah, enrichment project. And the reason that I came with that, I had a principal to challenge me when I was calling it extra credit and to do the research. And she was like, well, why are you having extra credit in the classroom? And I knew why I was doing it. And again, not just for grade wise, because there are so many topics that I just would spend weeks on that I know that I can't, and that there are some students that want to learn more on a particular topic. Oh, thank you. With that, I don't know if my students would say so. They call me extra, so because I get so passionate and I get going, so they just call me extra. So I embrace it. I was like, that's who I am.
I agree with everyone else. Extra is amazing, Valencia. You are an amazing resource to have in the classroom. And the passion, I think one of the things that I always love when you're sharing is the passion that you bring, and the way you challenge yourself to explore those new resources, explore those different perspectives, and understand that, it may not be for your students, but for you as an educator, that you just do an amazing job just taking the challenge to learn those different perspectives. And when we think about that kind of viewpoint diversity that we see with EAD, that's exactly, you're embodying that all right there, Valencia.
And I think part of the reason that I teach the way that I do is because I didn't come into the classroom until I was 40. And yes, my friends thought I was totally insane to start teaching at 40. My first teaching job at 40. So I always felt that I needed to catch up with that. So that's why I embraced the professional development. And now 17 years in, it is just because I continue to learn and I continue to grow. And that's what it's there for. And I totally love it. I am geeky about it.
You are amongst company here. I think that's one of the great things around these series. And yes, this is only our first session, and I hope that all of you who are here tonight will come back to our future sessions, because it's building this community and getting that amazing insight from experts like Kay, but from people in the classroom like Valencia. The value of that is absolutely priceless. So we truly appreciate that. What I would love to do now is I'm loving the history nerd comments. And that's how I describe myself that all the time. Like, oh, and then I started researching, and then I started clicking, and it was all downhill from there. Yes. What I would love for us to do now is give us some time. We're coming up close on time. And I do want to make sure that in each of these sessions, we end with, even if it's just 5-10 minutes of having an opportunity to connect with some other educators, have a conversation, and share, even if it's just, and I'm going to go to the next slide here, reflecting on Valencia's sharing and her discussion, or thinking about how you can begin putting EAD into practice. So we're going to do just 10 minutes of breakout rooms, short, quick, say hello, feel someone else who is feeling this pressure of having really rich instruction just like you, and then we're going to close out. So we will have a brief small group. I think that Patricia is going to open them for me. And let's see. There we go. Beautiful. I see all of you shuffling around. And I'm going to pause the recording. If I can find the button. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's always exciting when people come back and they have their cameras on. It makes my day. It's 8:22 and I'm still this excited in the evening. Yes, that's what it is. I am so excited. And I know that was a really short time to have a conversation with some peers, really just starting to scratch the surface. I want to say just a huge thank you to Valencia and Kay for coming and joining us this evening and sharing all of their wonderful thoughts and ideas and how they're beginning to use the roadmap and how the roadmap developed. So I greatly appreciate that. And I greatly appreciate all of you taking the time to really commit and attending the entire session. And I will say this, in our future sessions, we are going to have more educators, more classroom experts, more disciplinary experts coming to these sessions, and we'll continue to have time for you to connect with each other. And I promise I'll make it longer next time, I promise. But on that note, I just wanted to wrap us up because I also think it's very important that you be able to end our day on time, and because it's late in the evening for some of us over here on the East Coast. So if you have any final thoughts and reflections from Valencia's conversation, there is a reflection pad there. Go ahead, drop those ideas down. And it's also just a wonderful way to acknowledge how much it means to us when we have our educators who kind of take the courage to come and share, because we know sharing your practice isn't always easy. And I know Valencia is an amazing expert who shares all the time, but I still want to acknowledge that it takes energy, and I appreciate it, and all of us appreciate it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just for our last final bit to close us out today. So if you have any final reflections, a thought or two, drop it in on that final Padlet there. And we have an exit ticket that you'll see. I'll toggle back to the site for 1 second. So you can actually start doing it while I close us out. You can actually start your exit ticket after you finish this Padlet. There we go. Sorry for the speediness. Your exit ticket today, these are actually sentence stems that I borrowed from my good friend Mary Ellen. I used to think, now I think, and so I will. Okay, thinking about how did you come in thinking about the roadmap? What did you learn now? And what are you going to do when you leave? Okay, so thinking about all of those different elements. And I've also added there, I'm still wondering. This is just our first session. Each of the sessions that follow, if you come back and join us, we're going to dive into each theme during each session. So next session will actually be on theme number 1. This was our overview, kind of EAD 101. Our next session on January 25th, we'll dive into theme number 1. And again, we'll have some content experts, we'll have some classroom experts, we'll have some Padlets, and we'll have some conversation. So we hope that you'll register for that event. Patricia threw that into the chat there. And just to let you know, if you didn't know already, I know Kay referenced them before, but the EAD has very ambitious goals, okay? We have the goal of 60 million students, 100,000 schools, and 1 million teachers. That is basically all students, all teachers, really having the opportunity for that rich and robust history and civics education, okay? And being able to engage in that inquiry. So keeping that as at the core, I think it's important for us to think about that as we close out our session today, to think about how are you starting to bring this back into your classroom? How are you starting to really embrace that tension that we see in history and civics in a way that sparks student learning, that sparks inquiry, that sparks conversation? Save the dates. Our next session is January 25th, focusing on engaging, preparing youth as civic participants in our constitutional democracy. We'll dive into theme number 1. And then in February 16th, will be session number 3, exploring how communities shape the land and how land shapes communities. I'm not going to lie, session number 3 will have some maps in it. I love maps. Get excited. So hopefully you can join us for that as well. Also, if you're really interested and you've been familiar with EAD, or you just want to spark the conversation with other people in your district, iCivics is doing an EAD district teacher fellowship at the district level. So this is something that you can bring back, share that RFP link with your district leaders to just think about how can you bring EAD back on a district level. So that I just wanted to share that as well. I have other colleagues who are working on that pilot project, and it's just a great way to think about EAD as a district. So feel free to check that out. Follow us on at EAD Roadmap on Twitter. And if you're doing some amazing work, use the hashtag EAD Roadmap. Really share what you're doing, really thinking about as we make this a movement and we make this conversation, it's going to take all of us. And finally, just a big thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for engaging in conversations, and just really appreciate you being here this evening. Appreciate Kay and Valencia sharing your expertise, and thank you. So take the time now. You have 2 minutes. Look at that, 2 minutes before the clock. 2 minutes, complete your exit tickets. We will be sending out recordings as soon as we edit out the breakout room section, but we'll send those out as follow-up. So please, you'll have those, enjoy them. And we hope to come back for our next session. I'll stop sharing now so you can actually see our faces. Thanks again, everybody. And I hope you have a wonderful evening or afternoon, wherever you are. Take care.
Bye.